Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to view From Hell. So, I wanted to get into this film because I just had this, wanting to get some history on Jack the Ripper. Because, of course, it's been such a long time since I've gone on and known anything about this character beyond him just murdering prostitutes or women of the night. And so I wanted to know more things about this character and about the time period and so on and so forth that he was in, and so on and so forth. So this movie is to be taking place in 1888. Come to find out, we also have Inspector Frederick Alberline, Alberline, who is to have these clairvoyancies or these visions that he continues to have to go on to help him figure out this case. And so that I also thought was fascinating about this story. But anyways, so we have Frederick, who is to try and figure out this murderer, as he is to go on and not only slice a woman's throat, but then is to also cut open the chest to try to take out certain organs for reasons that they are not quite sure of why this person goes on and does this. But then they start to tie this into a certain procedure that had gone on and been done to Jewish people, as well as them going on and assuming that this person, who could quite possibly be Jack the Ripper, might have been a wealthy, possibly Jewish person that has to have the knowledge of the human anatomy, and it can't just be some Joe Schmo person, because they have to have certain equipment that is to be able to easily help them go on to dissect somebody at night without really seeing anything. So this person has to be fairly skilled, and so they went on to try to really narrow it down who this person could quite possibly be. And so throughout this film, I thought it was really interesting to kind of get some history of the Jack the Ripper character and so on and so forth. I thought it was just kind of interesting. So the grading of this movie, I feel, is to be a solid good film. It really mostly focuses on the women who are to eventually go on and be killed here. But then we get moments of Inspector Frederick, who is played by Johnny Depp, who is to try to figure out and hopefully solve this case and come up with his own reasoning for what's going on here. And so yeah, definitely thought this whole connection was interesting. I also thought that this movie was cool because it was to have been adapted from a book. So I was like, okay, all right, like, go on and try to find a movie that is to be based off a book is getting fairly easy for some weird reason. But anyways, I feel like I should probably just go on and just get to spoilers about this film. So, with that said, this movie is conveniently available on HBO Max. Whether that's convenient for you, not quite sure. But if it seems that you don't have HBO Max for whatever reason, maybe you'll decide to go on and rent this film. But yeah, I went on and saw it on HBO Max. So, in fact, hopefully you'll be able to go on and see that there as well. But anyways, let's go on into that double 5 time territory, because I think it's about that time to just go into what, of course, is to be spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we can spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of this film, again, we focus on the women, and then we roll into the whole Inspector Frederick thing. In the very beginning of this film, we do have Inspector Frederick, who is to be getting high by smoking weed and to try to get some visions to help him upon his case. So, but we then switch from that to having Mary Kelly, who is making her way through the night, talking to a number of her women. That is to also be in the same kind of business that she, of course, is in, which is to be a prostitute. Come to find out, it seems that within the area that these characters had lived in during this time, there seemed to be roughly about 1,000 women at night going on and propositioning themselves because of how hard things were within that time period. So we have Mary Kelly going on to make her way down this alley to then be grabbed by a guy named McQueen and a guy named Gordy. So these two characters are to want to seek out payment from Mary, and they want four quid or £4 to, of course, pay for Mary Kelly's protection, because I guess McQueen and Gordy were to go on and protect these women, which really I just think that they're kind of swindling them out of this money. So we have Mary going on and talking to these men, and eventually her buttons upon her clothes end up getting cut off, and we have Mary who's going on and saying well, hey, you don't know how difficult it is to have buttons on your dress. And we, of course, consistently have these men. We have McQueen who's well, hey, with you being who you are, it's like buttons shouldn't matter on your clothes. So we go on and find that these women are to be in a rough shape, to the point of them going on and not sleeping in a normal bed. Instead, in the beginning of this, they are all to be on this bench all together, being roped to the bench, so that way they can all technically fall asleep without falling off the bench. And eventually, when this guy comes to untie these people, we have them all fall off, and they all of a sudden realize, okay, it's time to get up. It's time to wake up. Because that's how hard things are for these characters. So we have Mary Kelly and all of these women go on to try to wash themselves and eventually try to seek out little bits of bread. So all of a sudden we have Anne Crook, who arrives to eventually talk to these women and mention that she is to have a child with a husband who is very wealthy, who is actually Prince Edward Albert Victor. So Prince Edward. So we go on to have Anne, who is showing off this baby to these women, and Anne desperately needs someone to babysit, and these girls are well, you know what, honey, we need to go on and we need to really try to get money for McQueen, and we need to get £4. and like we got to work all the time. And so Anne is like, well, hey, like I can go on and talk to Prince Edward and see if he will go on and give you guys the money you need, because I think that he's gone on and sold some paintings, and I think he's feeling very generous, so maybe he'll go on and help you guys out. So Anne then goes on to eventually be with Prince Edward within this bedroom. And so let's set up this other character. So we have Netley, who is to be this coachman, who is to be on this like this kind of this horse and chariot, to eventually be going on and uh, being the person who is to take the Jack the Ripper character wherever he is to go on and need to go. So we have Netley, who is to be threatened by Benjamin Ben Kidney, and so Kidney is to go on and put a knife to this guy's throat and threaten him, uh, to eventually consistently be working for this guy. And it seems that Netley is to not sleep very well because, of course, he is to be going on and doing this job during the night. And so during the day, when the heck is this guy really going to sleep? So he's even falling asleep on his horse and chariot. Um, and so let's push on. So we have Anne, who is now in the throes of passion with Prince Edward. And while they are going at it, all of a sudden we have Kidney and his associates bust through this place and are to go on and grab, of course, Anne Crook and drag her out of this place. And so it seems that Mary Kelly, who is played by Heather Graham here, is to be holding on to Anne's child, and she's like, well, like, I guess I'm gonna be having to send this kid off to an orphanage because Anne Crook is to go on and get arrested and to be questioned, and Prince Edward is to go on to eventually find that he has syphilis and is to be very ill and very sick to the point of him going on and being fairly weak and stuff like that. So we have Kidney going on and questioning Anne of who knows, like who else knows. And Anne's like, no one knows, no one knows. So Anne, after consistently being questioned by Kidney to possibly insanity, we have her being taken to a doctor named oh my god, he should be in here somewhere. Let me pause here for a second. Dr. Farrell. Dr. Farrell is to go on and write Anne off as her being or having dementia, and that he's going to have to go on and do a surgery where there is to be an adjustment being done on this woman's brain, on this skull, to try and fix this. So we, of course, have uh, William or Sir William Gull, who is to have a number of people behind him who he is teaching to eventually go through the halls to find Dr. Farrell. And it seems that since he is doing this procedure, and Sir William Gull is to want to teach these people um, the ways of mental health and so on and so forth, that Sir William Gull is to take this number of people to go on and learn from Dr. Farrell. So, after it seems that Dr. Farrell is to go on and do this procedure on Anne, it seems that Dr. Farrell turns around and is to eventually go into this secret society where he is to be blindfolded and have a dagger to his heart, and then is to be kind of having to recite this certain kind of thing to be welcomed into this brotherhood of sorts that have some royalty like ties. So we have to go on and talk about the very first death within this movie, who is actually Martha to Bram, who at some point when Mary Kelly is to go on and leave to try and take care of this baby, we have Martha who leaves into an alley where she is to be grabbed by Jack the Ripper and is to consistently be sliced into. So, now let's talk about Inspector Frederick. So, we have Inspector Frederick that is to be in this place where they are to go on and get people high and whichever. We have a one point where we have in this environment that Inspector Frederick is in, we have two women that are laying without any clothes on, and it seems that men are to be looking at these bodies and so on and so forth. So Inspector Frederick is getting high and is to seemingly be asleep, and Frederick is to go on and see all these visions. So we have Sergeant Peter Godley, who is to barge into this place to be talking to the Emperor, who is to go on and be like, hey, I paid up this month. And Godley is to say, it's like, well, Emperor, I'm not after you. Like, I'm after him. Like, you know who I'm looking for. So Godley is to go on and try to wake up Frederick, and so what ends up happening is that Godley ends up having to dunk Frederick into this thing of water for him to kind of revive himself. And so now Inspector Frederick is to ask Godley, it's like, well, like how long was I out? Like has the whole day passed? So on and so forth. And Godley's like, no, you've only been away for 4 hours. And he's like, okay, good. So we have Inspector Frederick that is to mention that he was to have seen a woman with a petticoat that had been killed, and Godley is just like, man, like, you know what, before, like, they used to, like, burn people at the stake for what you can do. Like, they used to go on and they used to burn people for what you know. So Godley goes on and takes Frederick to this corner where there seems to be a woman who had died, and Frederick is like, well, that's not the one that I, of course, was to have seen in my visions. And so they're like, oh my god, there must be another dead woman out there. So, because I think supposedly Godley had mentioned about this bank teller, and yeah, not the same woman that, of course, Frederick was to go on and see. So eventually they do go on and find Martha, and they find her dead. And so eventually we come to find out that it's like, okay, like, it seems for this woman's body that her throat had been cut. Uh, and eventually they kind of figured out that this person has to be right-handed, and that eventually Frederick is to realize, since there's a cut in the chest, that there must have been some organ at some point that had been removed, which of course gives the coroner a uh, case of him wanting to almost vomit here from the thought of that. So that maybe someone was to go on and possibly consume whatever organ this was, or to possibly be doing away with it somehow or another. Come to find out, we'll see in this movie that whoever Jack the Ripper is to go on and cut off like half of the kidney and is to send it back to the inspectors with this note, which I was like, okay. So we have Inspector Frederick that eventually is to go on and see the girl of which that he had gone on and seen. So we have a girl named Polly who is to go on and eventually find herself at night going on and eventually going into Jack the Ripper's buggy, his kind of place to go on and lure women into his horse and buggy, so that way he'll go on and eventually kill that person. Come to find also, the inspectors find out that it seems that Jack the Ripper kills somebody, but then doesn't leave them where he kills them. He takes them somewhere else and then drops them off. I guess to kind of give confusion of where it is that this person was killed. So Polly is to be the next victim, and they start to see a pattern emerge that this is just a ritual killing, and it seems that they also start to notice that there are to be 2 coins to be given to these characters, or these victims, I mean. And so we come to the conclusion that Frederick realizes that these coins are to be put over the eyes, because, of course, to pay for the ferryman in the afterlife, so that way these people won't get lost in the afterlife, that they can go on and pay the ferryman off to go on to heaven or go on to hell, instead of being stuck somewhere. So we come to the conclusion that Frederick is to realize that these people or this killer is to, of course, be very skilled. And so we have Frederick that goes on and speaks with Sir Charles Warren, and is to ask him that he needs to go on and speak with more skilled doctors, and that he needs to be able to see if he can go on and start asking people. And Sir Charles is to kind of come to the conclusion, it's like, well, what if it's not a doctor? What if it's a butcher? What if it's a just guys who are to be fairly skilled? And Frederick is like, well, that's why I want to go on to meet with a doctor, because come to find out, every single time they find out that people are getting killed, they find little bits of these grape like vines, these little twigs that are to be tied to grapes. And so uh, Frederick is to go on and say whoever this is has to be also fairly wealthy, because I guess grapes are not cheap within this time period. So I guess when you kind of look at it in like Roman times, like you would have like Caesar and everybody going on and eating grapes at some point, and eventually I'm sure a lot of wine was made even during that time period, and have to crush all those grapes also and be able to make wine out of whichever. So Frederick goes on and is to eventually question certain doctors. And so the first one, of course, that we have Frederick go to is Dr. Farrell. And it seems when Frederick tries to go on and question Dr. Farrell, it seems that he does not go on and get very far with this character. So instead, we go on and have Frederick, who then goes on to question Sir William Gull. So, come to find out, Sir William Gull is to only go on and teach people instead of do what he is to go on and do, which is to be this doctor, because at some point he had gone on and had a seizure some time ago, so he decided to go on and kind of quit the practice to then turn around and instead want to just teach people. So Frederick is to go on and give certain information to Sir William Gull, and so William goes on to make the consensus that, like, well, this person has to be very well in human anatomy, and he has to be right-handed, and all the kind of the same conclusions that I've already kind of mentioned, and so on and so forth. And so eventually Frederick is to now have a kind of, what's the word, a profile of who this guy could eventually be, but that's not going to stop this guy from going on and continuing to kill. So it seems that Netley, who is to be this coachman for Jack the Ripper, his character, Netley is to have some issues with having to go on and kill so many of these women. And the way that the Jack the Ripper character is to help Netley understand is that they are, of course, to be in hell anyways, and that this is hell, and that they just need to go on and do this and so on and so forth, convincing this guy that he needs to go along with what he needs to go along with. So the deaths continue to happen. So we go on and we have Dark Annie Chapman, who I believe is to be the next victim in line here. So we, of course, go on and have Netley, who is to tell, of course, Dark Annie here, that his associate, who is to be the Jack the Ripper character, but he doesn't tell her that, Netley is to say that this woman had been fantasized by this man, and that Netley will go on and give this woman grapes and give her alcohol and all kinds of things to eventually put her in this buggy to have her go on to meet with this client. And so we have Annie, who goes to eventually be like, sure, like, I'll go on and be willing to go on and do this as long as I know, like, what this guy is really into. We also have, after Martha was going to get killed, when Polly was to try to go on and continue to do her work, realizing how dangerous it is, we tried to have Liz, who is to try to comfort Polly, but then that leads to all of a sudden Liz starting to kiss on Polly, and Polly is to call this woman a pig and try to get away from her, and that's when eventually Polly is to stumble upon Jack the Ripper and get killed. So, but we now have Annie. Annie goes into this dark alley, and what ends up happening to this character is that I think we have here where Annie tries to get away from this Jack the Ripper character, and I think Netley has to go on and grab onto her, and is to see one man who's kind of looking at Netley doing this, and Netley is to tell this guy, "Hey, get out of here! Like you haven't seen anything," and so they go on and they have Netley, who is to kind of hoist this girl's head up for Jack the Ripper to slice this person's neck to then proceed to go on and kill this person like the usual way. So we then, of course, have Frederick realize that this is the ritual killing, and so that it seems that all these women who are to be these prostitutes should go on and try to seek shelter to try to avoid getting killed here. And it kind of gets to the point to where Frederick is talking to Mary and is to possibly come to a conclusion of who the killer could really be here. That Frederick is to make the conclusion that there's a possibility that Prince Edward himself may be Jack the Ripper. And so Frederick goes on and takes Mary Kelly to this gallery to go on and see if a person's face would look familiar to Mary Kelly, and come to find out it does, and Mary Kelly realizes that this is actually Prince Edward, and Mary Kelly's to go on and mention that she had gone to Anne Crook's wedding and eventually been the witness to the whole wedding of things. So Frederick is to come to the conclusion that Prince Edward is to have decided to go on and try to get rid of his own wife and then turn around and kill all the women who were connected to Anne, which were all these prostitutes. And we, of course, have Sir William Gull, who is to have to confess to Frederick. It's like, well, I'm sorry to tell you that, Prince Edward is to actually have syphilis. And Frederick is like, well, all the more reason more to go on and want to kill all these women because of revenge, because he, of course, is to get this illness. And Sir William is like, well, but no, even further, Prince Edward is now go on and be very weak and be very ill, so, there's no way for him to go on and have the strength to be able to be this Jack the Ripper character. It just is impossible. So Frederick is to realize, okay, his one possible suspect is now dashed. And so we now have to go on and have Frederick, who is to start to try and put the pieces together and figure out any random doctor who could somehow be tied to Prince Edward. Because there might be a connection that way somehow. So these women are to start dropping like flies. So, sadly enough. So, we have Liz that goes on and eventually is to tie herself to a girl named Ida who is to be French, and eventually we have Mary Kelly that goes and gets this hotel that these four girls are to be in. And because before, Mary Kelly had tried to get this place, and she did not pay up for the number of people that were to be in the room. So eventually, the landlord of this place was to realize that Mary Kelly was trying to sneak people in, and so he ends up hitting one of the girls, who, of course, is Annie with this pan, and that is right after Annie goes on to get killed by, of course, Jack the Ripper. So Mary Kelly is to try to keep these girls under a roof, so that way they can get protected. But it seems we go on to have Liz, who is in desperate need of a drink in this story. And so she goes off to have a drink. And we, of course, have Kate, who is to tell Mary Kelly, it's like, well, you do know that if she's going to go out there, like, she's going to drink all night, and that eventually she's going to get killed. And Mary Kelly is like, well, that, like, like, that has to be it then. Like, that's all I could really go on, and I can try to save as much as I can. But, anyways, so we have Mary Kelly, who ends up leaving, and so does Kate. So what ends up happening is that Liz ends up being propositioned by of course Jack the Ripper's character to eventually join them. And what happens is that we have all the police officers that are kind of being kind of like on the alert to like stop certain people that are to not only um like fit their profile, but not only that, it's like anybody who is wearing like wealthy looking clothes, just kind of stop them and question them. um because we have, of course, Frederick realizing that there's a pattern of how this guy is going around and killing people, and it is to possibly have a mandala, of course, that is to possibly be like the stars of David, the stars Jewish symbol, that is to be the pattern of which that this guy is going on and possibly killing people in. So they go on and tell all of the officers, like, okay, like, this is where we should be expecting this guy, and so on and so forth. So we have Liz, who has to get killed quickly, and then there is a guy with this horse, uh, and chariot and whatever, making his way to seek out of the rain. And so, since Jack, of course, was to be interrupted, he rushes off. And so the police officers end up going on and finding this body. Frederick ends up going on and saying, like, wow, like, this guy was really interrupted here. And so, like, we're going to have Jack the Ripper, who's going to need to go on and find another victim for tonight, because this one was not good enough for him. So next up, we go on and we have Jack, who is to make his way to find Kate, and quickly slice into her neck and then go on and do what he is to do normally. So Jack, we go on and find like he has killed most of these women by now. So really, the only people that are really left is Ada and Mary Kelly at this point are the only ones that are really left. So come to find out, we have this conclusion that Jack the Ripper may be a Jewish person of sorts. So all of a sudden, we have this lynch mob in this movie who is to try to get rid of all the Jewish people that is in the town, to the point of them needing to uh, like hide away from all the people in the town, any of the Jewish people. And then we also have a like a thing over one of the dead people who is to mention that the Jewish people are not to be blamed for this, and so on and so forth. So we have Sir William or Sir Charles Warren, who is to want that uh, that sign that Jack the Ripper had made to be washed off, removed. And so Frederick is to go on and say, no, like, that's evidence. And they end up kind of back and forthing about it. And so Warren goes on to force one of the people to clean up the evidence, because Warren is to mention that if it seems that uh, Jewish people weren't to go on and be a suspect of now, then like this whole thing will really push people to go into like hurting these people who may not rationally be uh, the culprit of this. So Frederick is to need to go on and figure out who this character could quite possibly be, who could be Jack the Ripper. And so finally, Frederick goes on and is to figure out who this could actually be, as well as spending so much time with Mary Kelly that he goes on and is to consistently kiss her and make out with her. We consistently find a number of people who are just having love making sessions within the middle of the street, to where the police are going on and trying to break things up between two people, because they are to realize what these people are trying to do, and they want them to go on and do this in a much more private area, like go on and find some shelter somewhere, some home, some temporary place, just kind of do this in the privacy of your own place. So Frederick and Mary are to continue to kiss, and this police officer breaks them up. And then this police officer realizes that this is Inspector Frederick, and then just kind of walks off. And so Frederick and Mary Kelly are to kiss yet again. Frederick is to go on and also tell Mary Kelly that he was to have had a wife who was pregnant at some moment. We have the flashback to that also, where Frederick's wife is to tell him that she is going to be with a child or with child. So come to find out, in pregnancy, this woman had lost the child and herself at the same time. So Frederick had lost his family. So we are to have Frederick finally figure out who the Jack Ripper character is. And so Frederick is to go on and make his way to Sir William Gull, and now pinpoint who the Jack the Ripper character is. That this guy has to be very skilled to the point of him having a very specific case that, of course, Sir William Gull was to give him an example of. And even to the point where Frederick was to draw on this chalkboard a knife that Sir William was to show him a thing of. So Frederick goes on and is to immediately say that with Sir William knowing all of the things needed to then go on and do this murder, Frederick is to have suspicions that Sir William Gull is to be Jack the Ripper himself. And so we finally go on to have Sir William Gull, who is to reveal that yes, he technically is Jack the Ripper, by then all of a sudden having his eyes change, and that Sir William Gull is to mention that he was to have made the 20th century, and or something along those lines. Like, the whole thing ends up getting quoted in the beginning of this, and then we re-put it into the movie where Sir William is to go on and talk about the 20th century, to where Frederick is to reply that it's like, you're not even going to live past the 20th century. So Frederick is to go on and be tempted to kill Sir William, but come to find out we have people coming from behind Frederick who is to chloroform him and knock him out. So we have Dr. Farrell and we have Kidney who are going along with Frederick here to put him in this buggy to possibly heavily drug him to the point of him going on and dying via overdose. So Frederick eventually is to try and go on and escape him getting killed off here, to where Frederick is to go on and attack Dr. Farrell and eventually knocking Kidney out of this buggy, to where he is going on and getting battered by the wheel of this buggy, to where eventually this whole horse and buggy just falls over and collapses, and Frederick is now being still dragged. And so we have Frederick who makes his way out of this buggy to have Jack the Ripper, who's looking on at Frederick, who has now escaped from his place. So Sir William is to move on to where possibly Mary Kelly had been resting, to have Sir William go on and kill the woman that is there, cut her open, and is to eventually take out her heart and put this heart into this this thing to be held over this fire, this little kettle. So come to find out, that actually wasn't Mary Kelly. Mary Kelly was to go and give Frederick this letter that she is to go on to decide that she realizes that she's in danger, and she's going to go on and run off to find that orphan kid that Anne had. And Mary Kelly is to run off to the village to hide away. And so Inspector Frederick is to want to be tempted to run after this girl, to live the rest of his life with this girl, but he knows if he goes on and does that, that there may be a possibility that someone that had been tied to this case will go on and find Frederick and find Mary Kelly and then kill her, and Inspector Frederick can't take that chance. So, because what happens with Sir William Gull is that eventually we have Queen Victoria, who is to go on and talk to Lord Halsham and tell him it's like, well, yeah, like uh, Sir William Gull was to go on and do what needed to be done for for the royalty, but also this guy is crazy. So we probably should go on and just take care of him. So we have, of course, the Brotherhood, who are going on and having this moment with Sir William Gull, where they, of course, are to have him on trial for what he has gone on and done. And we have Sir William Gull, who is to mention that um, that he has no equal here, he has no brother here, he has no whatever here, and that they're like, well, okay, we can easily just go on and have um, uh, Dr. Farrell here go on and do the exact same thing to Gull as we went on and did to Anne, which is to basically just take uh, like certain things and go on and adjust this person's brain to then go on and have this person be kind of this like in this catatonic state in this prison cell for the rest of whatever their existent life is. We also had a moment where they were to go on and showcase for these people to go on and see a guy called Merrick. I believe his name is John Merrick. And this guy seems to have some kind of elephant man sickness to him, where it seems that he has all these kind of like growths that are like to be without his throughout his whole entire body, that is to deform or misshape his whole entire body. And so we go on to have a number of people who are to look on at Merrick here and say that this guy should have gone on and died at birth and so on and so forth. But this, of course, was to be another thing for them to go on and show within this movie for reasons that I don't know why exactly that part was to be put onto this film. But anyways, so with that said, what happens by the end of this movie is we had Godley, who is to try to go on and awaken Frederick, because Godley naturally assumes that this guy is to be high again. Because we even have a moment where Frederick was to go on an experiment with drugs while he's in this tub, and is to eventually melt down this little block with the assist of this like certain abstinence alcohol or acidity alcohol of sorts, and go on and do this drug where he is to start to get visions about his wife from the past. So by the end of this movie, we have Frederick, who is to go on again, drug himself to the point of him overdosing and dying. And so we, of course, have Frederick, who is to have 2 coins in his palm. And so Godley is to take these 2 coins and to put it over Frederick's eyes as to pay for the ferryman. So Godley is to go on and realize that his friend is dead. And so really that's just how the movie just kind of finishes up. With that said, let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I did forget about, because I'm sure there's a mountain of things that I did. There's a bunch of interactions that I didn't mention about between both Frederick and Godley. Um, like, of course, there was the moment where uh, we have Frederick and Godley in this horse and buggy, and we of course have Godley who is to mention to Frederick that like he doesn't want to know what Frederick is to know. Like he just wants to be kind of in this ignorant bliss moment. And so yeah, so like there are some interactions between Godley and Frederick, but I think I left quite a bit out of just things for this film to just kind of really quickly try to summarize it and try to get this movie as quickly done as I could because this movie is about 2 hours and change, and I wanted to kind of really quickly sum it up. So with that said, I'm just gonna get out of here. I think that I'm okay enough to be happy with the way that this turned out for what it was. But anyways, I'm just going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.